What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. As you can see in that thumbnail, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive today into the culture shock at the Parramatta Eels since Jason Ryles has come on. You guys might not know what I mean by that. Specifically, I mean what he's done in the last week, right? Actually dropping players when bad form has crept into their game. We're not used to that as a football club, especially under Brad Arthur's tenure. So I want to talk about that a little bit because I think it's a good thing for the club. I'm just curious to see what it's going to mean long term. And then we'll also preview a bit of tomorrow's game against the West Tigers because I'm a bit nervous, to be perfectly honest with you, considering what we saw last week against the Melbourne Storm. But I'm hoping they're actually going to start seeing some improvement and start seeing some players that actually want to play for this club, because what we saw last week, wasn't very good at all. Now, I'm probably going to go on a rant in this video, so I do apologize. I don't have any notes written down. I'm just going to do this off the cuff. But we'll start with the culture shock. When I talk about the culture shock, it goes to what I just said, right? We as a football club have struggled to hold players accountable for a long period of time. And this happened throughout Brad Arthur's entire tenure, right? And it was his lack of, I don't know what the word is, confidence, trust to sort of drop players. He didn't really like bringing up the next man up kind of mentality. And when you look at, the really strong clubs in this game of ours for decades and decades and decades, it's been, having trust in your system and supporting the players and basically having this one team mindset. But for so long under Brad, we didn't really see players get dropped. If you think back to, Blake Ferguson, Wonga Blake, both being dreadful for very long periods of time, but we didn't really drop them. And sure, maybe the cattle wasn't there, but when you look at other clubs, they're supportive of bringing a young guy in to try and take them to that next level. And they know they're going to make mistakes, and they have faith in them that they're going to make mistakes, and they make it like a safe to fail environment. But we never really did that. Sean Lane was pretty bad under Brad at times. There's probably countless others that I can't even think of right now that we can name for days. But I think you guys, if you're watching week in, week out, know what I mean by saying that. And when you sort of look at last week's game against the Melbourne Storm, it was dreadful. And, some of that blame will probably have to go on Jason as a rookie coach. A bit of inexperience, not maybe getting the players up like he should have. But what we saw in that first, half in particular was dreadful, right? We had many senior players like Junior Paulo go completely missing. Dylan Brown was completely missing. He sort of threw everything on, Volkman's shoulders to run the game. Our biggest players weren't there to do anything. And, I think the worst of a lot, who is not a senior player, but Kelma Tuolangi, got hooked after 15 minutes, had to come back on. I think it was because of a HIA or an injury, don't recall which. Trying to forget last week's game, as I'm sure all of you are as well. And then came back on and was dreadful as well. And, what Jason has done is dropped Kelma. I'm going to get to that in a second, but he's dropped him. But if you sort of look at, last week, we didn't really have players stand up or be accountable. And, I think this is where the culture shock is going to come in for the players that are still here. So I'm going on a rant, right, and a ramble, but the culture shock obviously happened when Clint Gutherson was moved on, Regal Campbell-Gillard was moved on, a few others were moved on, because clearly Jason had a vision, and, your seniority, your experience with the club, your longevity with the club didn't matter, right? Because he's got a vision, he wants to make what's best for the club, and he's going to do that, right? And the players were clearly not used to that, because the second those kinds of conversations happened, Regan walked, Clint Gutherson walked, and a few others did as well. Or the players that weren't re-signed ended up having to leave. So they sort of weren't used to those kinds of expectations. And then you look at last week's game against the Storm, and players like Kelma have been dropped. And to sort of quickly bring that up, I believe it was Kelma, Charlie Geimer that were dropped. Kelma Tuolangi there was dropped, and Jake Targo was out because he was injured. But I think it's safe to say that he would have been dropped after the performance he put in. Yes, he had to dig deep when he had that injury in the game and continue to play on, but he was very dreadful defensively. And, Jordan Samrani gets his chance tomorrow, which I'm really excited for. Sean Lane's back, who has been pretty poor, especially last year. So hopefully he comes in and steps up. But I don't think players were expecting this. So I'm truly hoping that the likes of Junior Paulo, who was dreadful last week, actually sees that Jason is actually holding people accountable. And you're not going to get reprieve where you can play for 3-4 weeks of bad form like you could under Brad, because that stuff is not going to fly anymore. So I'm hoping to sort of see that culture shock come out and, spark something in Junior, because he was incredibly disappointing last week. If you look at the stats, he had, I think, 8 hit-ups for 64 run meters. And I know he had a long stint on the sideline, but those 8 hit-ups, I'm fairly certain 5 of those came in the last 10 minutes. So when we sort of needed him in that earlier period of the game, we sort of didn't get him. And it was really disappointing to see. And whilst, last week was dreadful, there was a couple of really good signs, I think, in particular from Riley Smith. I thought he was great for the period that he was on. I thought he looked very good. And I don't think it's going to be long before he's our starting hooker. He just obviously needs to build up that match fitness. But I believe it was the Warbrick intercept. I don't think it was Coates. I could be wrong, but he chased for that really hard. The game was already gone. We'd already conceded 50 points. And obviously he's a kid on debut wanting to impress, but it's really easy for young men in that situation to sort of give up when they're seeing their senior players like Junior Paulo, Kelma Tuolangi, Joffin Hengawi not playing very well, Dylan Brown, who was dreadful. You know, it's easy for guys to turn away and shy away in situations like that, and he didn't. And I thought that was really good. And I thought, you know, there was a couple of really good things from Iongi as well that I thought were, you know, going to be nice to see moving forward. You know, his commitment to hit ups and sort of punching through the line, and he looked really energetic. He looked like he was actually going to cause a bit of damage at times, but obviously made some errors. He threw that intercept that I just referred to, when if he went short, he would put Will Penasini over untouched. But there was nice signs in there to sort of see how committed he was. I think it was good to see when Will Penasini as well. I thought he was very, very good. Jermaine Hopgood was good. So I think there's good signs there, right? There are players that clearly show they want to be there. I'm just a bit nervous about the others. You know, the likes of Joe Offa, you know, the likes of Junior Parlo, Kelma Tuolangi, who's now dropped, that didn't seem to want to be there. And that's scary to say when it's round one, because they've just had a whole preseason with this coach. And obviously some blame, like I think I said, needs to go to Jason for being inexperienced and maybe not getting these guys up. But, you know, Junior Paulo to go missing in that kind of match is very disappointing. The same thing with Dylan Brown. Now, obviously I think he signed with Newcastle before that game, which is why he was so dejected in that pre-presser, the pre-match presser. I was actually talking to a few people on Discord saying that interview from him was very different, right? We've not seen him like that before. Usually you see him before the game about being, you know, really energetic and his usual self, but he seemed really reserved. And I thought maybe he's hyper-focused, right? Mitchell Moses is out. Maybe Dylan Brown is finally going to step up. And then the game started and he was probably the worst game he's ever played in Eels colours, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. And I'm hoping that that's not going to happen again this week. And if it does, that goes back to the conversation we had in the last video. We need to try and move him on, because if he's not going to play well, his head game's not going to be here, we shouldn't want him here. But I'm hoping this culture shock that I referred to at the start of the video from Jason Ryles and how he's handled things, i.e. moving players on, how he's tried to build this Parramatta person, this Parramatta culture, how he's now, you know, dropped players after one bad performance, I think might spark some buzz in these senior players. And in all honesty, if we don't see a reaction and we don't see these guys competing on every single play, then I think we're going to have some pretty worrying signs for the rest of this season. But the only shining light on that will be that we're probably going to be able to move a lot of these players on if they don't want to be here, if they're not going to perform. And that's probably one thing we can hold our heads high for at the moment. All right, and that might sound a bit strange, but if there's one thing that's going to come out of this season, it's going to be Jason Ryles holding people accountable. And I'm hoping that he's going to end up being a good coach, but at a minimum, we know he's going to hold people accountable and he's going to push them along if they don't want to be here. And that's something that we can't say our club has done for a long period of time. I think Brad was a very good stalwart for this club. His time had obviously come, and when it did, it was obviously too little too late, but he had issues for a long period of time, and that was putting too much trust in the player group. And I think some of that culture still stinks, if I'm being honest. Some of it's still here present in our club, and Jason maybe hasn't got rid of it as quickly as he could, and he's obviously done a really fast job so far. It's only been one off season. He's basically transformed this club a lot. But yeah, anyway, I'm rambling. I want to hear what you guys have to say on those thoughts. I think it's probably early days to talk about the culture shock in detail, and I probably want to touch on this point in future videos, but I think the signs are there. They're early, but they're looking good. And obviously the signs on the football pitch are dreadful. But I think in terms of holding players accountable, I think that's going to make us a stronger club moving forward. And maybe this is just me, you know, being a bit delirious, a bit delusional. But let's hopefully see some improvement tomorrow. And just to quickly preview this game, this is a game that we should win, right? I know Api Korosal's back and their halves are quite good, but we're at CommBank. It's our first home game of the season. We should win this and should win this comfortably on paper, right? You know, Dylan Brown should be able to tear these guys to shreds. We're at home, right? And that might be, you know, saying too much considering Ronald Volkman is still our hooker, and we've got, you know, Semrani on the wing making his debut, who had a couple of issues in the preseason, obviously what we saw last week. But, you know, we should come out, we should compete, and we should dominate in all honesty. And I'm expecting that tomorrow. And that's maybe me, again, being a bit, you know, rose-tinted glasses and me being a typical Parra fan, getting our hopes up. But on paper, we should beat this club. They won the Wooden Spoon last year. We put 60 points on them in the last round of the year. There's no reason why we can't do that again. And I know they got Luai back, but you guys get what I'm saying, right? We should win this comfortably, and I'm hoping we see a turnaround. And I'm going to be really nervous if we turn out and play exactly the same as we did against the Melbourne Storm, because if that happens, we are in for a long bloody year. So anyway, that's just my thoughts for today. Let me know your thoughts tomorrow. I will be up at CommBank tomorrow. I was going to say Bankwest. I will be there tomorrow sitting in the sun getting cooked in that 36-degree heat, but hopefully we have a win to cheer on. So anyway, thanks for watching, and click go the Eels.